The town of Berwick Upon Tweed has had a turbulent history, changing hands between the English and the Scottish a number of times throughout the centuries. It's been the site of much bloodshed between the two countries, as they fought for supremacy in the border region, especially during the medieval period. However, there was in particular a brutal massacre that occurred for those living in the town that seemingly has been forgotten in history. So join us today as we look at the horrific medieval massacre of Berwick upon Tweed, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. During the reign of King of England Edward I, in Berwick the fortifications found inside the town consisted of mainly a ditch, an earthen rampart and barricades made of timber. Today they wouldn't be considered too strong, but at the time they did do the job to resist the Scots and other possible invaders. The town and the castle had been transitioning from English to Scottish rule a number of times. Edward I would focus his attacks on Berwick to reclaim it for the English, and in spring 1296 he invaded Scotland with his army, crossing the nearby River Tweed. At the time the river was swollen, but everyone managed to cross the river, except for a young boy who was carried down with the current and drowned. On the same day the Bishop of Durham helped the English invaders by allowing them to cross the river near to Norham Castle, and the whole English army came together towards Berwick, marching along the Scottish side of the River Tweed, and they tried to force a garrison there inside the castle to surrender. Berwick was a royal burgh just north of the border, and was Scotland's most important trading port, only second to London in medieval Britain. It was even called the Alexandria of the North, such was its importance. Edward I set up his quarters inside a convent near to a nun's quarters in the fields around Berwick, around a mile from the town. He waited then 2 days for the garrison to accept the surrender that he had offered. During this downtime, he arranged for his army to camp in a huge field near to the nunnery, and he also knighted a few members of the army. The cluster of English soldiers was huge, and there was a vast array of banners, and then in the distance a king would have been able to see his fleet sitting in Berwick Bay at the mouth of the River Tweed. The crews on board the vessels thought that Edward was planning an assault, and they were hesitant to join at first, but they entered the mouth of the river and sailed towards the camp. The conditions, however, were rather rough, and 3 ships actually made errors, running aground, and these sailors were then attacked by the castle's garrison. A number of crew members were killed in the fighting, whilst others would flee in boats or by desperately swimming to escape the Scottish. The vessels that had been stranded were then burned by the Scots, and this in particular angered the English king, Edward I. He saw this happen, and then wishing to save his fleet, ordered an instant assault on the garrison, directed towards the river and the sea. He commanded his soldiers to then also force their way into Berwick and further into the town. Some Scottish writers state how Edward managed to obtain entrance into the town by cunning means. However, the English soldiers were advancing, and some were carrying actually Scottish banners. These soldiers in particular were mistaken by the Scots for reinforcements, and were successful in getting past the defences and scaling the barricades. Whilst inside the town, there was little resistance faced by the English. The only opposition was a group of 20 Flemish merchants, who held out a strong tower, called the Red Hall, and they managed to hold out until the evening, until the tower was destroyed by a fire, and all those inside it burned alive. During this attack in particular, the brother of the Earl of Cornwall was killed by a spear to the eye, who was looking up, and he was the only knight who died for the English during this assault. Now this is where things take a rather bloody turn. In Berwick, whilst the English were inside, they inflicted a huge amount of bloodshed onto the townspeople, and completely massacred most who lived inside of the town. It's said by the Scottish writers that they massacred all of whom they found on their entrance, without any distinction of age or gender, so for this we can work out that they killed children and also women. It is debated how many were slain by the English, with one source saying that 7,500 were murdered in cold blood, so many that the streets ran red with blood for 2 days, to the fact that the blood even made the mills near to the river turn. Another account says that 7,000 were brutally massacred, and the accounts of the bloodshed in the streets is also confirmed. Matthew of Westminster also states how there were no fewer than 60,000 put to the sword inside the town, which is an incredibly large amount. Another source also states how the amount massacred was 17,407, and this is a massive amount of people who could have been killed inside of the town. Amongst those who were slaughtered by the English were many gentlemen and soldiers who belonged to the Scots. It's assumed that the carnage inside the town was huge, and Edward is known to have inflicted the most barbarous cruelties on the inhabitants of Berwick. The churches were also said to have given no protection to those who fled inside them, with the English soldiers breaking through the doors and slaughtering many inside the houses of God within the town. The churches were also sacked, with all their riches and ornaments stolen, and the king, to add insult to injury, even housed his horses inside all of the churches after the massacre. Edward would later write to the Pope that year, answering the charges of cruelty against the Scots, and he was accused of having destroyed an innumerable multitude of his subjects, burnt monasteries, churches and towns with an unpitying and savage cruelty, slaying infants in their cradles and women in childbirth. He was also accused of burning a school and slaughtering 200 young men who were learning at the time. After the carnage of the massacre, Edward and the English took Berwick. For a number of years there was great resentment against them for the cruelties they had inflicted upon the people of the town. Now Edward, for a number of reasons, may have ordered the slaughter. Firstly, he may have done it as a direct result of the attacks that were taking place on his ships within the river. However, he may have also have done it to inflict a huge psychological blow onto the Scots. The sight of thousands of innocent people being slaughtered would help Edward's reputation as a notoriously feared ruler of England, who would stop at nothing to capture new lands and towns. The huge deterrent effect that the slaughter would have would possibly force more Scottish towns further north to simply hand over control of their settlements to the English based on what happened at Berwick. The garrison, which were previously offered a surrender inside the castle at Berwick, the next day accepted the terms and surrendered to the English king. 2,000 soldiers later were granted clemency in the area if they swore that they would never fight against the King of England. For several days after the slaughter and massacre, Edward continued to fortify Berwick as a town and the castle in order to protect the town and its forces from any future attacks. After the events, the town was then filled with English inhabitants and settlers, and Edward would receive homage from the Scottish nobility inside of Berwick. After the massacre, Edward I also continued his quest further north into Scotland. Edward's reputation as a feared military leader and a brutal king was helped by the events that occurred at Berwick. Today it is a more forgotten event in British and English history, which shows how bloody and brutal the English could be, especially against the Scots. The time in which the massacre took place was a time where things were incredibly volatile between the Scots and the English, and for centuries later things would continue. The events that occurred in Berwick in March 1296 live long in the memory for those who lived nearby. To say that the mills were turned by the flow of blood from the streets that ran through really shows how brutal the event was. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.